Nobody wants to be misinformed on a subject, or at least no one wants to believe they are misinformed. However, all of our information has to come from a source that we can understand. Thus, a majority of the time, we find ourselves relying on experts to shape our knowledge on a particular subject. However, just because someone is an expert on some things, or sounds like an expert, doesn't mean that this is the case. Enter the phenomenon of authority bias. Authority bias was defined by social psychologist Stanley Milgram as the tendency to trust an authority figure over all others on a subject, regardless of what they say. This happens all the time, even to the best of us. This bias often comes from a place of literal authority, but in many forms comes from a place of intellectual authority. Sometimes an expert in one field will make statements on matters they are knowledgeable in. Other times, a former expert will go back on their word and use their authority to make fraudulent claims on their past background. This behavior is not even limited to people with known credentials in a subject. Many times, an entertainer or public figure will make themselves look knowledgeable as a means to deceive the public. One can't think critically about this issue if they don't know they're being deceived. It is not substantial just to point out the existence of these behaviors. We must also demonstrate how they happen. Let's look at an expert in another field and how they try to spread misinformation in another subject. James Tour is a celebrated synthetic chemist who is best known for his work in creating the nanocar. In recent years, Tour has taken it upon himself to debunk research in abiogenesis, also known as the origin of life. Dr. Tour uses his expertise in synthetic chemistry as a means to discredit the current knowledge of abiogenesis. However, the sciences behind the origin of life are vast and outside his own field. To demonstrate this, we will look at a seminar Tour gave in 2019. In this seminar, Tour cites and attempts to debunk an article in Nature by Jack Szostak. Tour's main issue is that the article doesn't show the right molecules it talks about. However, the main focus of the cited article is to give a simplified overview of abiogenesis. Therefore, some of the information is simplified for the layperson. The main issue with James Tour is that he usually is the most scientifically knowledgeable person in the room he speaks in, which means he can say anything that sounds smart, and people will assume he knows what he's talking about. This is dangerous because it can strengthen confirmation bias, someone's tendency to only listen to what they want to believe. Occasionally, we will see people use their past credentials in order to speak with intellectual authority, such as the case of Patrick Moore. Patrick Moore is a former environmental activist as well as a former president of Greenpeace Canada. Since leaving the organization, Moore has become a consultant for Monsanto, defending some of its more questionable practices, as well as now being a denier of the dangers of climate change. Moore's claims about climate change are different from many on his side of the debate. While he has stated that there is no scientific proof that human emissions of carbon dioxide are the dominant cause for the minor warming of Earth's atmosphere over the past 100 years, he has additionally claimed that global warming is actually a good thing. Of course, both of these statements are untrue. Anthropogenic climate change is a fact, and global warming has multiple negative effects, such as rising sea levels and ocean acidification. Moore has also famously defended the use of potentially harmful pesticides, most famously stating in an interview that you could drink the active ingredient of Roundup, a weed killer, and suffer no ill effects. When pressed on the issue, he quickly backed down before angrily ending the entire interview. The active ingredient in question, known as glyphosate, has been found to be potentially carcinogenic. Even if we're not, it is certainly unsafe for human ingestion. And saying that it is not shows that Moore is willing to make basic claims and hopes that he is believed on authority alone. Moore's method of using his past expertise to develop an intellectual authority bias is much more dangerous than Tour's behaviors. The issue here is not that Moore is an educated individual who is simply misinformed about another field of study. What is more problematic is that Moore has completely abandoned his field of expertise and shown to directly undermine trust in it. Perhaps the most nefarious case of intellectual authority bias would be someone without credentials posing as an authority on a topic. Unfortunately, this is not at all uncommon. Ben Stein is a famous case of this. Ben Stein is a writer, lawyer, comedian, actor, and political commentator. He is most famous for his roles as a stuffy, monotone teacher, scientist, or general intellectual. His expertise is further advertised through his work as a lawyer and speechwriter for Richard Nixon. Ben Stein is not an expert in any scientific field. He is a good lawyer, writer, and comic. This has not stopped him from making numerous pseudoscientific claims about topics such as evolution. In 2008, Ben Stein co-wrote and starred in the film Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. The film operates on the false idea that intelligent design by a god is as rigorously scientific as the theory of evolution. This goes against logic purely based on the fact that intelligent design is not a falsifiable claim, and thus not testable or provable. Of the many other claims the film makes, one of the most egregious is its frequent comparisons of evolutionary scientists and the Nazis during World War II. Some of this is to do with the aforementioned supposed suppression of intellectual design discussion. But there is also the mention of fascism and Darwinism being linked. Though not explicitly stated, one can assume the film is referring to the term social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is not a scientific idea. Rather, it is an antiquated sociological term from around the time Darwinism was first brought into the scientific community as a means to try and apply survival of the fittest to society. This made way for eugenics and Nazi ideology to gain favorability and is universally disapproved by all academia. Stein's methods of influencing authority bias are possibly the most dangerous of them all. Ben Stein is not even close to an expert in the fields he speaks on. Yet he uses his public reputation as an intelligent figure to influence people's opinions. So, what have we learned about authority bias in an intellectual sense? Intellectual authority bias comes in many forms. Many times, it can come from a knowledgeable figure who is simply speaking on a topic outside their expertise. Other times, it can come from someone who used to be an expert in the field, but has left or been ostracized, causing them to use their former expertise to spread information. Most shockingly, some will develop an entirely false image of intellectual authority to trick people into accepting their beliefs. It is important for us to think critically and learn to spot all of them.